Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Wealth Conversation podcast with me, Tsitsi Mutiti. I guide high-achieving women on their journey to build lasting wealth so they can prepare for an abundant future in every area of their life. I hope that today's episode will help you to transform your relationship with money so you can make the choices that will enable you to create the opportunities and lasting wealth that you desire. Let's get straight into this week's episode. Hey there, it's good to have you back with us. So I know you've been listening to this podcast every single week and that you've been taking in the wealth of knowledge from all the guests that have been on the podcast so far. But a lot of you have told me that you haven't taken any action, mainly because you're not sure where to start. And I get it, because I've been there before. The good news is, however, that I can definitely help you get clear on the 3 steps that you can take straight away to create the solid foundation that you desire. So head to the show notes and click the link to book a Power Hour session with me. There's definitely never been a better time to become the designer of your financial future. No matter who we are, we all experience change in our life. For many women, starting a family brings a whole host of changes, not least how we manage our money going forward. So I've invited chartered financial planner Charlotte Wood to share how she prepared her finances before and after starting her family. Welcome, Charlotte, to the Wealth Conversation podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Please share a bit more about yourself and your background.
I'm a chartered financial planner, and I run my own practice. I've been in the profession since I left school, making the tea and doing the shredding, and then making my way, up the ladder, as it were. And I was employed in London, in city, for about a decade before I kind of realised that I needed to do things my own way a little bit more. So I went self-employed initially under someone else's firm, established that I needed more creative control of sort of how I branded myself basically and put myself out there. So I then set up my own practice, and actually it's relatively recent. So that only went live in 2019, and it has just been me for most of that, although I have now got one other woman who works alongside me under my company, which is Rosewood Financial Planning. So that's kind of my proper day job, as I call it. And then I do that only 2 days a week because I've also got a really young family. So I've got 2 kids under 3 who dominate my life, as you can imagine. And so I very much work in my practice and look after my clients around my kids, and I also do a lot of stuff within the profession. I'm very active in the profession, advocating for women in financial planning, because it's not necessarily the most welcoming profession or industry in general, financial services for women in the UK. And having spent, I don't know how many years now, 14-ish years in the profession, I've seen enough and heard enough and experienced enough myself that I know that we need to do a significant amount of work within the profession to make it better, to actually increase our gender diversity. I'm accidentally kind of doing a lot of stuff in that area as well, and flying the flag for gender diversity in particular. So that's somewhere for me to, I guess, hone my quite feminist and socialist values, which hasn't necessarily come across in my financial planning life and work, my proper day job, but it's somewhere to kind of channel that energy that I have. So I kind of have 3 main hats, I suppose, these days.
I love it. That's fantastic. Thank you, Charlotte. I've read some of the articles that you've written and also been a part of a conference you actually hosted recently.
Mm-hmm.
And it was phenomenal, for women in the industry to share their stories and just realize how powerful we can be when we work together. So I'm a great supporter of your work in that respect.
Oh, thank you.
Now, you mentioned you've got a young family, and we thought that for this episode, we talk about how people can prepare for their finances before going through that change of having a family, however that may look. So prior to having your own family, how did you go about managing your finances?
Well, so it's a funny one because in a way, my initial answer to this when I thought about this question was, well, we didn't really change anything. Like my husband and I, before we had kids, we are quite cautious individuals when it comes to finances. We both operate, so he's also in finance, but he's an accountant. So like an accountant, a financial advisor, like obviously like money is quite a prominent discussion and topic and thing that we are very conscious of in our household. It certainly doesn't go on the back burner. And we've also been like, I know it sounds stereotypical for a financial advisor to be like, oh yeah, I'm a planner, but like we really are planners. So like when we book a holiday, we're thinking about how we're going to pay for that, like quite, you know, we've got those dates for when the deposits are due in the diary. Like we're not like scrabbling at the last minute. We actively save for my tax bill in advance rather than pay it retrospectively. So that's because of that cautious. And I'm quite open about the fact that we've both got quite big scarcity mindsets. So we can quite easily panic and spiral when it comes to like finances. So we both operate from that place and mentality, which drives a lot of the reasons why we're so cautious. So I suppose in terms of how we managed our finances prior to having our family, so we consolidated our family finances quite early on in our relationship. I'm not necessarily advocating that, but we were in our 20s when we met. We didn't really have a lot of money. Like, so when I say we consolidated our finances, I really just meant like we kind of stopped treating it as like your income and my income. We kind of just sort of treated it as like household income quite early on. But we didn't have any real like financial wealth behind us. We both were on the property ladder separately, but had very little equity in our homes, didn't have lots of savings and stuff because you just don't at that age, generally speaking. So yeah, that was a very easy thing for us to do. But what we did do prior to having a family, or I did do prior to having a family, which was a big transition for us, was go self-employed. And whilst that decision wasn't exclusively because of having a family, like it wasn't necessarily planned for that one reason, it was definitely a driver for the fact that I didn't see how we could continue working the way that we were. So me being in the city 5 days a week, him working a full-time job too, at the time not at all working from home. Obviously the pandemic shifted that quite a lot, but yeah, like how we could possibly continue in that way and bring home the money that we were increasingly used to in an employed way whilst also having a family. And I always wanted to be a present parent, like more than happy to put them in childcare, but I was never going to personally feel happy putting them into childcare 5 days a week. And that's not in any form of judgment to any other parents, but that was the route that I knew that I wanted to take. So it was a case of, okay, how can I have more control? How can I have more autonomy about what my work life looks like, for lots of other reasons too, but we're talking about family today. And so yeah, I went self-employed in 2017, and it was, in hindsight, really stupid at the time, and very risky. It wasn't stupid, it worked, but like it could have gone very wrong, because we got married within a few months, sort of by accident, ended up buying what is now our family home. Like we weren't generally looking for it, but like just kind of found a house and we were like, we really like this. And then so we trebled our mortgage, going from our cheap flat to our like big family home. And literally the same month that we did that, I was like, I'm going self-employed. Like I can't do it. I didn't do it that month, but that's when the conversation started. And we'd put all of our savings into stamp duty and the house. Like we had little to nothing to fall back on. And our bills were in a place where my husband couldn't financially support us on just his income. And there's me going, I'm just gonna stop earning money for a while and start again from scratch.
Very bold.
It didn't necessarily feel like at the time, for various reasons, it didn't feel like I had a choice. Like it felt like it was a thing that had to happen. And I suppose it was a choice. I could have gone back into another employed role. I knew I couldn't stay where I was, but I could have just got another job, I guess. But I was like, no, if I'm making this transition now, I'm making this transition in a way that is long-term for me. And therefore, like, yeah, self-employment felt emotionally like the right decision to make, but probably on paper was a terrible idea. But, you know, we made it work. But yeah, at the time it was like, okay, so I went, we bought the house in the January, like, and completed and moved in with like little to nothing in the bank at that point. Like, that getting into the house took everything. Trebled our mortgage. My husband couldn't support us, and then we had sort of 6 months. I went self-employed in the July. We had 6 months to buffer up some money. And when I finally went self-employed in July, it was like, okay, we've got 6 months to make this work. Otherwise, we have run out of money. We cannot afford our life anymore. And we're going to have to make some big shifts. And obviously, the most natural thing would have been to be like, we've got to get rid of the house, like, or do something with the house, not live in the house anymore, for sure. And it worked. And we never got to that point, thank God. But yeah, in hindsight, it was quite a leap of faith. To be honest with you, that was one of the best things we did, because what I've seen now from my friends who have had children more recently, or, you know, women who I've been talking to as I've entered motherhood over the last 3 years, people who haven't necessarily done that first are now having to think about that whilst also having children, and therefore also having to pay for childcare. So would I have been able to navigate that transition plus childcare, plus the extra like mental load that comes with being a mum and having children? I'm not sure. Like, I'm so glad I got the self-employed stuff done and out the way and settled way before we had a family. Well, I say way, a couple of years before we had a family, so slight exaggeration. But yeah, I know women now who aren't sure what they're going to do going forward, because they're not being given a lot of flexible options by their employers. They're maybe not the most enthusiastic about those career choices that are available to them easily, and going self-employed is too much of a risk for their family at the moment, with having young kids. So it's a really tricky situation for people to be in. And it tends to fall on mums, doesn't it? Like, we know that, like, because they're the ones that go on maternity leave. They quite often don't want to go back into full-time roles. That's quite common. It's quite often us that have to reassess our careers post-children. Generally speaking, a lot of men quite often just end up, you know, my husband's career has been unaffected. It was never a conversation about what his life was going to look like after we had kids, because it was just going to look the same.
You mentioned that prior to having the family, you consolidated your finances very early on. Is there anything that you haven't mentioned that you did prior to having the family that you are still doing, and that's helping you manage your finances now that you've got your 2 children?
Yeah, well, so for us, it as a kind of, since being self-employment was the transition for us, really, not the having the kids. The reason being, because we continued to both earn and work through having children. I took relatively short maternity leave periods, but have reduced my hours, so I now work 2 days a week, one when the kids are in childcare, but have still been earning. So we haven't really, I guess, made any massive shifts in how we manage our money post children. It's just that our costs have exponentially increased. Childcare in this country is friggin' ludicrous. So yeah, it's very much been business as usual. So some of the stuff that really works for us from a normal, like, monthly budgeting perspective is we use a lot of sinking funds. So we have, like, before we even had Starling, which is who we now bank with, but we had pots of money for certain things. And my husband is incredibly anal at this stuff, being an accountant. So, like, we have, I don't know, something like 15 sinking funds, which we save. Yeah, I know it's extreme, like, for various things that come up through the year. And so we've got the big things that you would expect, you know, the holiday fund and stuff like that, of course. But even down to, like, my contact lenses that I buy, like, quarterly, or like our hair, like my hair I get done like every, like, 12 weeks or whatever. Like, there is a hair account that money gets put into monthly. I'm not necessarily advocating that for everyone. That is because of, like, the minutiae, I don't know, that just, like, literally, like, every pound has a purpose when it comes to being married to an accountant. So yeah, we have lots of those, but stuff like the more practical ones are stuff like we've always, even before we had children, had what we call a short-term savings pot. And that is where we put like 200 quid a month into it. And it's just stuff that comes up, and like if we all have that stuff, right? So last month I wanted a few new Christmas decorations. I wanted to put a few bits in the boys' room or whatever, but before you know it, you've spent 60 quid or whatever, haven't you? Like, it's not hard. Or like someone's birth, like we suddenly get invited out to a family meal for a birthday or whatever. It comes out of like the short-term savings pot, and like every month without fail, even though we don't know where that money's going at the beginning of the month, like it goes. And I think we're not particularly we're quite careful about how we spend our money. So it's not that we're like just spending it willy-nilly, but just it's naive to suggest, like, for all of us, stuff comes up.
Exactly. No, indeed, yeah. And I've got a little pot in my bank account for my hair and my nails.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are the things I want to do. And I think for women, especially when they have children, it's so easy to focus on, spending your money on things for the children and the house, which is something that I found myself doing, where I'm like, okay, I'm always buying stuff for the house, always thinking about buying stuff for my daughter. And when it comes to my stuff, it's like literally, going into all my handbags to make sure that I've got the money to pay for my hair to get done. So no, now I also put money aside every month for my hair and nails.
Too right. Because like, why should we not get this? I would say there's like a relatively, like, clearly they're luxury items, but like also quite basic needs. Like, you're not exactly buying like super expensive handbags every month or anything. Like having your hair and nails done is like, I completely get that. So obviously we've got like a kids pot since we've had kids that has like stuff like they're forever needing clothes, and like
as they grow, growing. Right?
So it comes out of their swimming lessons as that comes up every term, and preschool when that comes up, and that's what we've just kind of expanded on that since we've had kids. And then the other thing that we do, which is really, really important for our relationship, and we would bicker and have a lot of arguments if we didn't do this, is that we literally every month we take the same amount of money out of kind of our joint finances, and that's our money that goes into our personal bank accounts, and we spend it how we want. So generally speaking, I spend all mine on like cake and coffee and wine, and he spends all his on like board games, on like he's saving up to go on a stag do next year to Dubai, because like his friends can't just do like basic trips to like Bournemouth or something, like it has to be a big deal. But like I'm not paying for that, like he's taking that out of his own money, so he's saving. And that's very much a really healthy way for us to manage our money, because I think if all of our money, like I know quite a lot of families who like everything goes into one pot and everything comes out of one pot, so you kind of see all of each other's spending, and I mean that works for some people, great, but like we would definitely bicker that, like, well, you spent that on that and you spent that on that, and how much did you spend on shoes? And like we would be those people. So it is healthier for us that we have our own individual pots of money that we spend or save as we see fit for our stuff. So if I wanted to buy some like new clothes or whatever, like it would be from that pot of money. And I'm not saying that everyone should work their money in that basis, but it is good for us. I think that otherwise we would be very tit for tat.
I work the same way. Everyone has their own pot of money, but when it comes to household stuff, it's it's a joint thing. So
it's like family finances first, and then like we treat it as a bill. So like that fun money, when we are going through our finances, we literally treat it as like, oh, okay, well that is our fun money for the month, and like we literally pay it out pay ourselves straight away effectively, as though it is a bill. And like it's much better for us, and also it's not relevant to who's bringing what into the household. So it's not, at the moment, and since I went self-employed, really, to be honest, he has earned more, like he's brought more into the household, but it's not like proportion, like we don't factor it in based on who's bringing what into the house.
70-30.
No, like we don't do any of that. And particularly now, I'd be fuming. I look after like I say his children quite passive aggressively, like obviously they're our children, but like to the context of this, like I look after his children 3 days a week. Like if I was like not getting as much money to spend on my stuff because I'm looking after our kids, like that wouldn't be very fair, would it?
No, not at all.
I'd be raging. It's just like, this is the family income and we designate it as such.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it sounds like it's definitely working. But for the average person or the average couple, it can be quite difficult to get to that point. And just talking about money right at the beginning of the relationship, before you've even like got to the stage of let's get married and let's go on this journey to becoming a family. So how did you start that conversation with your partner at the time when you were still dating?
Well, and I think it's because I had a really easy journey into this, not because I did anything particularly right or anything. It's just a case of because of the people that we are. I know like Catherine Morgan always says like opposites attract when it comes to money, but like that's just not the case in this household. Like we are both, as I said, very cautious. We're both very transparent and open about finances. And so I am lucky, I guess, that we are very much on the same mindset when it comes to how we manage our money and stuff. And we were talking about stuff quite openly very early on, like probably some money stuff came up on our first date or whatever. Like, I definitely remember we talked about like marriage and kids on our first date, like not in a context of like interviewing for my husband. Like I'd be like, I want to be clear, he was asking those questions. Like, I was not like, so do you want to get married one day? Like it was definitely him. But yeah, we had some quite big conversations quite early on. But do you know what? Actually, I think that's better, like so much better, because I don't know if I guess it's by the nature of what we do for a living, like that money feels like a particularly big thing for us. But like money is a big thing for everyone, right? And so I needed to know quite early on when we started to before we were moving in together, I still needed to know kind of who I was with from a financial sense. So we didn't really have a lot of money behind us, but I also knew, he wasn't defaulting on his mortgage or had racked up, tens of thousands of pounds worth of debt doing anything reckless. Like we were both quite financially secure, a little bit hand to mouth on my part at the time. I was working 2 jobs because I'd bought the flat that I had like with my ex-boyfriend, who obviously that had fallen apart and we'd broken up, and then I was paying for that place by myself. So I certainly didn't have a lot of money, but we were just very open about it. But I think going into a relationship now, like if anything happened and I was entering a relationship now where we have got assets, we've particularly got kids, like it would be a whole different ballpark, but I would still be having those conversations really early on. And I think if someone is shady about, I'm not saying that you want to necessarily say like, oh, what are you earning and give me the number, but I think you want to start to understand someone's mindset with this stuff, and just like discreet things like getting a gauge. Like so stupid, but like getting a gauge on someone's credit score. I'm not saying you want to like it's an interview sheet on your first date, but like if you've been seeing someone for a few months and like they're saying like, oh well, my credit rating shot to pieces, and you're sort of like, oh why, what happened? And like they're like, that for me would be like a red flag. And I know it sounds really petty, but it would be a huge issue for me emotionally to get into a relationship with someone who was, I say, financially reckless, because I'm not saying that everyone who's has a bad credit rating is financially reckless, because I know some people would like falling on hard times or having to make difficult choices is one thing, but I think people would just be quite if someone said like I had a really crap time of it, I was made redundant, I really struggled, like fine, that's transparent, like I can relate to that. But like if someone's just doing silly stuff, my sister did this early on, like in her like 20s, like, and she's open about it, she took out some store cards, she did some silly stuff, she financed a car she couldn't afford, like she knows it was some reckless stuff, and that's the stuff that would be quite triggering for me, I think. So yeah, I think it would be very different for me now, having got some financial wealth behind me, having more value in a house, having kids to support. I think there's a huge thing to like trusting your instincts on on that sort of stuff as well. Like, and if people are, if you're feeling like there's a red flag, like that's like, trust that. I think.
I love that. Trust your instincts. I think it would have saved a lot of people. I think I've had a couple of clients who I've worked with in terms of coaching, and they come with those stories of being in a relationship with someone who was reckless financially, but it only came out
so
after
a
being
lot later in,
and at that point the stakes are a bit higher than when you were dating, and so you start making some decisions which end up being negative for you, thinking that you're actually helping the other individual. So as you say, it's not about going with a long list of questions to ask, but I think we as human beings, we do have this sixth sense where we can kind of think, maybe I need to dig a bit deeper, or maybe I'm not interested in this sort of person. And I think for women, that's really important to know what you don't want in somebody. Well, for anyone who's entering in a relationship, I think it's important to know what you don't want, the headaches you don't want to deal with.
But I also think there's something almost like I could talk about this a lot. I'm going to try and super summarize it. But like as women, like it's okay that we want to be financially secure. But the problem is that sounds a bit money grabby, doesn't it? Like, if you're talking about financial security in a relationship, like how that sounds is like saying like, I want that person to support me. And that's not the conversation that we're having here. It's not about being like, I want them, in a straight relationship, I want him to provide. It's not about that. Like my husband certainly doesn't provide single-handedly for us, and never has done. But equally, in a relationship, like he could have racked up 15 grand's worth of debt or something, and that would have had a massive impact on me too. So like I needed to, when I talk about like financial security, I talk about it in the context of like the openness, the transparency, and knowing where we're at, knowing what footing we're on. And so many people, and not just women, but so many people are blindsided by what the other person's doing or bad money habits. And that to me is like, if like suddenly it came out that like he'd racked up debt or anything like that I didn't know about, as far as I'm concerned, like that's a huge betrayal. Like that's like up there with like, having an affair sexually. Like I know it's a very different thing, but like it doesn't feel any less of a betrayal to me if that was, because it's that has such a big impact on our lives, and also my finances and my life and my income and the security for our children. Like it's a huge, like, and I think we almost feel like we can't be open about that or talk about that because we don't want to be seen like we're greedy or money grabby or anything like that. But like,
or get that label of being the gold digger, which is and it's not the case. And you've raised some really, really good points there, Charlotte. I think another side to it is, when people are open about their financial circumstances, whether good or bad, it's much easier. And I think you're able to find a solution quicker, or put a plan that is going to work, because a lot of people have got these great financial plans that they want to implement, whether it is buying a property together. But if you're not honest and open with each other, you are going to hit a brick wall, because when you have to go through that mortgage process,
and they turn over everything. Absolutely. But even, renting somewhere these days, I haven't actually done it myself, but I know that they go through, everything with a fine tooth comb these days. And the credit checks now and stuff. So it is like, I'm really aware that it could sound like I'm being like, oh, well, like you need to know someone's credit score before like you get into bed with them or whatever. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm just saying the implications of the impact on someone else's decisions and what that can do on your life and your credit score. And like our credit scores are ridiculously important, aren't they? Like it's like they shouldn't be, but they really are. Like, I know, an important number in our lives. Like they have the ability to overturn that in so many ways, that you kind of just need to know, right? Like you kind of need to know before you get serious with someone, before like it is. But I am conscious it sounds conceited, because it sounds a bit like what we're saying is, oh, well, I wouldn't be with someone who hasn't got money. But it's not that at all. Like I think it's just, if someone was honest about it, I wouldn't be turned off by someone saying like, oh, you know what, I went through a hard time and I'm rebuilding myself. You know, it's quite common after divorces or whatever. You know, that wouldn't be like a red flag to me. It would be sneakiness or stuff not adding up or being a bit like shady about an answer. Like that would be like massive red flags to me. Like,
yeah. And I think for us, we've seen what happens when people aren't open with what's happening with their money. And we've seen the financial implications, but also the emotional side of it. There's a lot of emotion, and hiding things takes a lot of energy as well, doesn't it? It takes a lot of energy and confusion. So the more people can get comfortable about talking about money in general, I think then some of these conversations are easy to have in whatever setting, whether it's a relationship or family setting, because it's okay to have, like you say, have fallen on bad times or have made mistakes. For some people, that's how they learn to manage their money better after, because then they know what it's like on the other side, and they don't want to do it
again.
Exactly. That's kind of like what I went through. It's like, no, that's not for me. But and it's absolutely okay. And I think once we get to that point of it's okay to have gone through this and you learn from it, then it's much easier to have those conversations. So I know that one of what you do with your clients, Charlotte, is you help them navigate the various changes that we go through in life. In your experience as a financial planner, what have you found to be the simplest things or the easier structures or habits that could help support individuals and families navigate any change?
Yeah, I'm gonna give what's a really boring answer to this, but like it is like the only answer, which is, and I'm sure you probably, if you've asked other people on this podcast, they will have said the same, especially as financial advisors, but like it's always about having that emergency fund, isn't it? Like, and I know that we talk about it as a buffer, like if the roof falls in or whatever, like having a pot of money that's there for an emergency or a rainy day or whatever. But it's more than that. It's about having the ability to navigate life's changes and not think about the money first. So like if we put that in the context of my family life, if my husband was made redundant tomorrow, like if that's it, suddenly he was like, crap, like I've been made redundant. Of course, our first thought would be, oh my God, like that, we're going to lose that income. But quite quickly, we would go to, okay, but we're fine. We're okay. What's your next career move? And having that emergency fund behind us would put us in a position of that career move not being one out of desperation or quick shit, we just need to get the money in. It would be a case of, okay, what do I want life to look like going forward? And it gives us the luxury of time to and him in that context to figure out does he want to go back into the same role but for a different company? Does he want to change industries? Does he want to like come out of it completely and like set up a board game cafe, which I think deep down is like a dream of his? And I'd be like, okay, let's do it. Like now's the time. But we wouldn't be able to have those sorts of conversations if we didn't have that, emergency fund behind us. I've seen how they operate, obviously, on so many levels for my clients. In that situation where one partner doesn't want to go back to work after having kids, quite often the other person can't necessarily support the family. But it still buys enough time to think about what they want life to look like going forward, or invest or support them through some additional training, stuff like that. So yeah, we have to, don't we? Like as financial planners, like the first port of call, like whenever anyone comes to us, and the first thing we need to know is, have you got an emergency fund? And if you haven't got that, go away, come back in 6 months when you have, because I'm not doing anything with you until we know you've got that security. I know it's a super duper boring thing to say, but it is the key to being able to make our life decisions based on what we want and living our best lives, rather than emotional panic and fear, financial panic and fear, I should say.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. And boring is good because it's easier to understand.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
actually, that emergency fund helps you, as you say, just navigate whatever change, and it buys you time. And sometimes that's when people make the mistakes, when they don't have that time
Mhm.
and they're panicking. And that's a gift you can give yourself by just saving a bit of your earnings every month and building them up. There is always this question around how much should you have in your emergency fund, Charlotte?
Yeah,
So
and
I'm going to ask you that because I
oh,
know
go
people are
on.
probably thinking, so how much should I
Oh
have?
God, well, if you ask textbooks that we study when we were like getting qualified, it's like, oh, somewhere between 3 to 6 months of income, isn't it? Like that's what they say, that's what the textbooks say. Um,
Exactly.
for me and my experience and how I frame this with my clients, is always a case of financial security and financial, like, feeling safe isn't a number. Like, there is no right number. And so for me, it's a case of, what do you need to feel safe? Like, what do you need to sleep at night and feel comfortable? Like, and if, I've had some clients who are like, oh, I just need £3,000 in the bank. And I'm like, well, maybe a bit more than that. Like, some, like the boiler goes and that's your pot gone, do you know? Like, so, yes, that probably isn't quite enough. But equally, I have had some clients who have said, 6-figure numbers. And the financial advisor in me, who is seeing the lost tax planning opportunities and the lost investment opportunities, like, part of me dies inside because I'm like, oh my God, we could use that money so much better. But can we use that money better? Really? If that's what someone needs to be able to get their hands on, like tomorrow, to feel safe, and to sleep at night, if suddenly that, £100,000 figure goes down to 95 or 90,000 because something happens and they are not sleeping at night from fear and panic, then okay, that's part of our job, right? Is to make clients feel safe. And so there would be some coaching to be done in that scenario. So to be like, let's just talk about why you feel like you need to have a 6-figure sum. But if we got to a place where that is just what the number is, then that's the number. Do you know what I mean? So I don't, that's not, I don't know, it's a very wish-washy answer, but for like, if I put a number on it for our family, like, it's increased since we've had kids and since I went self-employed and since we had the house. So like, those life changes have all increased our number. Probably when we were both employed and living in a flat, which cost us next to nothing to run, and we were earning really good money, our number was probably about 5 grand. Probably, like, that was enough for me to feel like, for us to feel safe. These days we would be having kittens if that's what we had readily available to us. Yeah. I'd be like, oh my God, I am panicking, and it would be affecting my sleep. Yeah. And that's what we're talking about here, right? So now, realistically, our number's probably 12 or 13,000. If it dips below that by a significant number, we prioritize building that back up. And that's the thing that people quite often don't do, is prioritize that, building that back up again. They'll like dip into it, which happens, like, it happens for everyone, but like, they'll dip into it, something will come up, or we didn't quite put enough away for the holiday, oh, my tax bill was a bit bigger than I planned for, oh, actually I just paid for the car insurance as a lump sum because I got a better deal on it or whatever. But then we kind of just let it continue, and then suddenly we're like, oh, we have nothing. Like, so actually, like, prioritizing building that back up again is where most people fall down on this. They kind of get it to where it needs to be and then just kind of let it taper, and then don't prioritize putting it back in there again. But yeah, as I say, there really is no right number. I know it's not very helpful, but
no, I'm with you 100%.
Yeah.
There isn't a right number. It's, life happens, things change and circumstances change, and the number will change with that.
But I also think it's to do with like your mindset and your, to a certain extent, your financial literacy. So for us, like, anything more than like 12 or 13,000 pounds in cash to me feels like a waste, because of the fact that I am a financial planner and I do tax planning and investment management for a living. So like, but then I'm obviously very comfortable navigating that world and making those decisions for us. So that's when people need financial advisors, right? To take on, so
Yeah,
to
exactly.
have that conversation around
Yeah.
how to navigate that world. So
Yeah, and to show you how you can do things slightly differently. But yeah,
yeah.
no, I think it is really important. And there's no point trying to do anything else if you don't have that emergency fund. It's so crucial. And thank you for raising that point about building it back up. It's something I had to learn the hard way, where it's like, oh, I've got some money, and then something happens, and then the money's disappeared, and I'm expecting it to miraculously
Yeah.
appear. But
But
actually,
we
you have to
also,
build it back up. Yeah.
yeah, and we have that lifestyle creep, right? Like we all do that. Like fundamentally, like, you know, for us, particularly since having kids, lifestyle creep has been, I don't know if creep is the right word. I don't know what the next level up from creep is, but you know, like, oh, well, we're just going to put them into childcare, so to like preschool 2 mornings a week. So then that's like 100 quid every term or whatever. Like, I don't know, that's not the exact number, but you know, like, and so like, well, we'll take that out, and we hadn't put that money aside, and you know, their swimming lessons have come up, and then stuff just comes up more than we know we got a good deal going to Butlins, which we hadn't, you know, we did that a bit spontaneously or whatever, so that came out of there. And you know, just car seats, you know, so it's just stuff like this is just like very short-term things that have come up for me recently. And when you are so caught up in life, like, so doing the things that earn you money, like work, obviously, and then also just keeping on top of all of the life admin and our homes and our families, and like, and I mean like extended families as well, like it's very, very easy for us to lose track, right, of like where the numbers are. And I literally have like a sheet of A3. Is that the big one? I think that A3 is the right thing. A3 sheet, where every now and again, if I feel like I'm a little bit out of the loop on where our money is, I like literally have to sit down and like write it all out on this big A3 sheet of paper, where I'm like, okay, so these are our fixed bills. These are our sinking funds monthly. Like, this is where our savings is at. This is where the kids' investments are at. Like, I need to have it all on one sheet in front of me so I can literally see it all. And I'm a financial advisor, like, and married to an accountant. So like we shouldn't lose track ever, right? But like life, do you know, like life happens. And 2 weeks later, we're like, we really should go through some of this stuff. So yeah, and we're not reckless spenders. It's just that it's a job, right?
Yeah.
It's more life admin to keep
It
on
is.
top of money. Like,
Yeah. Yeah,
so.
no, I do the same. As soon as my salary goes in, I've got my spreadsheet, and it is literally one sheet.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, to be able to see everything together, because then you can, if you have to move things around, you can see how it impacts everything else, right? Just having that reassurance that, okay, things are going the right way, or if things have gone awry, you can work out which pieces to move, what's not necessary, etc. And hopefully feel like you know, at least that part is sorted out for this month.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things I've really had to do only really recently is prioritize. And I don't even know if priority is the right word, but it's a case of like, what's the next thing that's coming up that we really need to make sure we're sorted for. So it's like Christmas is obviously like right around the corner, and then like I've got my tax bill in January, and like I never really had to think about that stuff, but like I feel like because there's so much life admin now, like the mental load of being like a parent is a lot, especially being a mum, frankly. So I feel like I really need to know like what's my next big expense and how we definitely there for it. And I kind of list out our next 4 things as a timeline, and like, you know, we've got a holiday deposit due in March, like we're not quite there yet, so we need to make sure we plug that next, you know. Like, so I never used to feel like I needed to do that, but these days I do, because it's very easy to feel like I'm out of control with this stuff.
I hear you. Charlotte, I could talk to you about this all day, but I know you've got a young family, and they're probably waiting for you outside the door.
Downstairs, it's fine, with 3 child gates between me and them, so I should be all right.
Fantastic. Now, as you know, I believe that to create true wealth, we must all be clear on what wealth means to us in each area of our life. So in a few words, please, could you tell us what wealth means to you in the following areas: physical, mental, spiritual, social, and financial well-being?
Wealth, in the truest sense of the word, as far as I'm concerned, is freedom, right? So we talk about financial freedom as financial planners, but actually, in financial freedom, absolutely is, you know, the ability to make our life decisions not based on finances. And quite often as financial planners, that's in relation to stopping work, so retirement, right? Like, or slowing down at the very least. So when we talk about financial finish line, financial freedom, that's what we really are talking about in wealth in that sense. But I actually think that the freedom concept actually applies to all of that, at least for me, like in terms of wealth. So like physically, like quite literally freedom, like as I have children climbing up me like most of the day. So for me, that feels very like I literally went through it. I was like, my mental well-being, again, having freedom from like my family. It sounds awful, doesn't it? But like they're a lot, frankly, they are a lot. So for me, like freedom really applies to all of those things, social well-being as well. Like I love my family. I know it doesn't sound much like it from what I'm saying about them, but like I absolutely adore my children, clearly, and my husband. But I am a better parent, a better wife, a better financial planner if I have space away from them. Like if I have a time out, and I really feel it when I don't really like in all aspects of my life. And like it does affect my physical well-being, because I'll drink more wine and eat more chocolate, because like I'm an emotional eater and drinker in an unhealthy way. Social well-being, I went out on like a bit of an unofficial Christmas do a couple of weeks ago with some other women in the profession, and we did a spa day. And like that's like having that life outside of my family is like, I need that personally. So freedom for me and space is better.
I love that.
Personally, that's wealth in my view, is having some space. And also we know that that's where our creativity comes in, when we feel like better across all of those platforms, that we know that that's where we start to excel, right? Because the space gives our brains the ability to function. When we're like bogged down in that mental load of life, I am definitely not operating from a like 100%, so
Oh, thank you for that. I love that freedom. That's I love it. Now, Charlotte, how can anyone listening to this episode get in touch with you if they want to work with you?
You can contact me. I'm on most of the social medias, so Twitter and Facebook. I'm at Rosewood FP. Instagram, I'm at charlotte.rosewoodfp. Full disclosure, though, you will probably see quite a lot of photos of my children and my dog. And then also, we obviously through the main business website, which is rosewoodfp.co.uk. And for any women who are listening who are in financial services or in financial advice and want to be a part of a community, we also have a big Facebook community. So you can look us up. We're Empowered, which is the inclusive community for women in financial advice. And it's just a safe space for women in the profession to communicate and share ideas and rant. There's quite a lot of that going on. So I can be found in many mediums.
Yeah, the Facebook group is great. Thank you for creating that, Charlotte. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, Charlotte. It's been really good. And thank you for sharing your story and your journey, your family's journey so far. Thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much for having me on. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Connect with me at The Wealth Conversation on Facebook and Instagram so we can continue the discussion. Also, if you're ready to define what wealth truly means to you, then go to thewealthconversation.com and download the Wealth Cornerstones guide. Until next week, stay focused on becoming the designer of your financial future.